Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside chat this morning on a topic of exploring AI in the healthcare segment, exploring the possibilities of AI in the healthcare segment. As we all know, the technology is moving at a very fast pace, and and applications that we have in the technology in the different segments and the different verticals is boundless at this time. And healthcare is one segment. Healthcare life sciences, if I combine as one segment, is one area where we are directly seeing the impact of these technologies on the lives of the people. And that's something of concern, of importance, and also a matter of hopefulness for all of us, how technology can improve our lives going forward, especially in the area of healthcare, which we all are concerned about. We are happy to have with us Tarun Mathur from Indegene. He's the CTO based out of California. Indegene is a company, engaged in a focus on life sciences and healthcare segment. And so Tarun, very warm welcome to you this morning, and thank you for joining us in, I believe, which is a late night for you from California. Now, let me just start by asking you, and probably as a way of introduction, Indegene is one company which has been long focused on healthcare, and healthcare has become far more important today. It was always important, but I think post-COVID, I think everybody is looking at what impact technology can make, and AI is definitely one area which has been in the news lately. But before we get to the AI part of it, probably you may want to introduce some of your experiences as a part of Indegene, the focus areas and the broad learnings before we dive into some of the AI part of it.
Sure. And thank you, Sanjeev. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to NASSCOM for having this event. It's really appreciated, and it's good to connect with such a diverse and interesting audience. As you said, Indegene is in the life sciences sector. Our company is exclusively in this space and always has been. So we work primarily with enterprise life science organizations, so pharmaceutical, biotech type of organizations. And we look at the drug life cycle primarily, right? All the way from early stage clinical R&D through post-commercialization efforts. And you're exactly right that especially post-COVID, the focus has been really around unlocking opportunities, what they call the quote unquote transformation in the space, right? I know that's a heavily used word in the tech sector, but prior to COVID, there's a certain way of getting things done. The incentives to make major disruptions to those processes were fairly low, and the risks were measurably high. So what tended to happen, certainly healthcare and life sciences is adopting and always has adopted state-of-the-art technology. We just tended to do it at a pace that maybe wasn't the same as what you would see in some other sectors. And I think that's rightfully so, right? I think healthcare is a fairly unique domain in where it makes sense to be cautious. You can't undo something bad. So what happened around COVID time, the pressure was there that we were forced to make certain changes, right? The ability for patients to come and visit in person, doctor visits started to go down, demands on how to get a drug developed, approved, tested in record time had to be made, how to scale up the manufacturing and deploy the products, and how you monitor the products for safety and adverse events, and to keep the doctors and patients updated. So a lot of these transformations were forced during that time, and our eyes were opened for a lot of organizations. That there's the opportunity to make changes ended up being fruitful and showed the art of what's possible. And so since that time, the world hasn't gone back to the way it was pre-COVID, right? So there are changes that we see as permanent throughout this industry and throughout people, the way we work and the way we engage. At the same time, we're seeing that the state of the art of technology is moving at an unprecedented pace, and artificial intelligence has been a key part of the life sciences story for quite a while. Now with generative AI coming on board, there's new opportunities that are being opened up with the different types of models and different use cases. But we've seen at Indegene a large interest in how can we transform the business processes, and particularly patient experiences is a big part of the story. How do we create a digital patient experience that's far superior to what it was before, and do that in a responsible way? And so that's certainly what I've seen. My journey in the company has been from the past close to 20 years. So I've seen it from when things were much more paper-based in the processes, where they were very, very conservative. And then we saw the adoption of large data, big data in analytics. And then we saw adoption of machine learning models. And now we're seeing these large language models, large pre-trained models, and generative AI. So I certainly have seen this shift.
Absolutely. You're right. The generative AI thing has been in the headlines, ever since it came out, and we can't seem to get enough of it, and there's a new development probably every week. We hear some announcement from pretty much every large company. Maybe we'll like to understand from you, where do you see the possibilities of AI, and particularly generative AI, both in the areas which is in the patient care, or in the areas which go beyond that also. I mean, there are areas which we hear about drug discoveries. I mean, I will not like to mix up the two. There are two different things, though both impact the lives of the patient. But where do you see the low-hanging things, or even the long-term possibilities and opportunities from the Gen AI side of it, particularly?
Yeah, when we're seeing a lot of use cases being opened up, we can start with the patient experience side. So one of the long-term issues in the enterprise space has been patient adherence. So keeping patients, refilling their prescriptions, monitoring them for side effects, and assisting them when they see issues. But we see a big challenge for not only for the enterprise organizations in terms of refills and their revenue, but also obviously the patient well-being and the health. And these are traceable to several different issues, cost certainly being one factor, but there are a variety of other issues that sometimes keep a patient from being adherent to their prescribed program. It could be lack of understanding or educational resources. It could be certain types of side effects they don't know how to deal with. It could be not knowing when to take the pill and when to take the prescription, not going for follow-up visits to monitor maybe their blood tests and those kinds of things. So a variety of issues are behind this, and it's been an ongoing challenge in terms of how do you engage with patients in a way to keep them adherent. We're seeing with generative AI some new opportunities to bring almost a personalized experience at scale through these virtual assistants, virtual healthcare assistants that are able to connect and talk and interact with patients at a quality level that is now much closer to their for them dealing with a human as compared to what it was before. Certainly we've had chatbots and other types of AI systems before that interacted, but we're seeing now with generative AI another level of engagement. And we've seen some studies and reports actually showing that there are a lot of data showing that patients actually prefer, in many cases, the chat GPT response compared to their own physicians, right, for reasons. But even beyond that, the more compelling thing here is what the generative AI means architecturally. So prior to this, we in the AI ML space, we do a lot of supervised learning, right? So being able to build models with curated, annotated data that's been trained by subject experts. And that's usually a partnership between your data science and engineering teams with your subject matter experts, almost a 50-50 balance between them, because it's a fairly technical task, but also a very domain intensive task. With generative AI, something interesting has happened where the language of code is now moving to English, right? So it's you can actually whether it's through prompt engineering or more advanced models that are dealing with agent frameworks and chain of thought and those kinds of approaches, but you actually design and construct these systems in plain English, which means that more power is given to the people who really feel the pain, the subject matter experts. And the technical experts are, of course, have to build and run that supporting infrastructure and empower the SMEs. But we're very excited, and I think the industry is starting to see what opportunities now are unlocked when I give control to the subject matter experts, and they can start instructing and teaching these AI systems how to reason and solve problems. So and that's unlocking a lot of opportunities. So patient engagement was one, pharmacovigilance is the other. How do you monitor drug safety once it's out in the market, detect adverse event signals, process those cases completely and properly, and then make a regulatory submission from that. So those are two examples among many.
No, great. No, this is interesting and sort of revolutionary in a way that when you say that the statement that you made, some people prefer responses from ChatGPT compared to their physician, right? Which means that we have sort of a virtual assistant who could be answering questions when we don't have access to the doctors.
Absolutely.
And now taking it beyond AI, we see that advent of so many technologies right now into the market. How do you view the confluence, or I should say, the advent of all these technology like announcement? We heard the AR/VR set from Apple. They said it's been in development for a decade. And there are similar things, which are happening all around us. How do you see all these technologies coming together in solving some of the areas concerning the patients, or even for that matter, for the drug companies also, right? I mean, let's not leave that out also, because the amount of investment that goes into drug development is actually directly affects the cost of healthcare, So how do you see that being impacted also? So I kind of mixed up a couple of things here, but
no, but they're all well connected, and end of the day, I look at things quite positively, right? It's right now, these are early days, and it's us to figure it out. I know many people tend to go down a dystopian route and think the government or these large companies will control it all. But I kind of look at it a bit differently. These technologies, as they're emerging, open up new ways of understanding the patients. So wearables is a good example. We've already living where most of us are used to smartwatches and other types of sensor devices. I look at what Apple launched and what Meta had before with the Oculus. I have an Oculus Pro that I use for some of our work as well. But these are basically new forms of sensors, and they are early days. And yes, $3,500 from Apple is eye-wateringly expensive. But what it does is when a company like Apple steps into the game, it's interesting because it lends a different type of credibility and acceleration in the market. Well, whether you agree with that's a good thing or not, but when Apple enters a space, then a lot more activity starts to happen. More people get involved, more developers feel confident in building applications, more people start exploring the use cases, just due to the nature of the company. And Apple has a good history around data privacy and security. So when we look at healthcare, the fact that they're bringing this device and we can look at healthcare applications, then that's, this adds some strength to that story, right? When it was just Meta on their own, given the history of that company, there's a lot of debate around data privacy and security, but when Apple does it, it's slightly different engagement. Now, that technology isn't the category of forward-looking, right? We don't think that immersive, or what Apple called it, with spatial computing is their word, but metaverse, maybe the term that a lot of us are used to. We don't think that's going to make a big dent in healthcare in a big way, this year or next year. It's going to take time to get there, but we're pretty convinced that an immersive, rich experience for the average person makes sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to have a much more personalized, immersive experience and a connected experience. If it was totally comfortable and seamless, then of course we'd want it. So many of us are glued to our little 4 and 5-inch cell phone screen. It's not a big leap to imagine that when the device's hardware gets to that level, we would want that. And if that's the case, if we kind of agree with that, then it makes sense to start piloting and looking at what are the use cases, what lessons can we learn from early pilots. And that's where the Reality Pro or the Oculus, I think Quest 3 is about to come out and Quest Pro is out. These devices are not affordable for the average person, but they allow companies and researchers to experiment with them. So that's in the category of kind of longer term view. In the shorter term view, though, the use cases around applications of generative AI, the barrier to entry is much lower there, and the ability to rapidly experiment, try use cases, run focus groups, that we're able to do in quite nimbly. And as you mentioned earlier, we're seeing announcements on a pretty much a daily basis. For a while, I have a team that's tracking this space. For a while, it was 3 major announcements a day was when this was happening, and today that pace hasn't really let up a whole lot. I know that this is a recorded session, so you never know when people are watching it. But today was June 13th with Larry Ellison. So Oracle announced their play in this space. We saw Databricks having a new large language model offering. Salesforce has theirs. So a lot of players are coming to space, and already we know about Google, Azure, and AWS. And so we're very excited by the opportunity to experiment and rapidly iterate prototypes and POCs with this technology. And in some cases, it's actually already graduated a bit beyond that. Unlike things like Metaverse, which I think are little longer track investments. They will pay off in the end. We're convinced of that, but it's a longer runway.
No, true. So this is a sort of a bandwagon that nobody will want to miss. And I think, as you said, the applications are, limit is our imagination there. I think that our imagination becomes a limit there. I think I see endless possibilities. And one of the questions that I hear from the audience here, they're saying, let's look at, we talked about from the patient standpoint, how a patient can benefit. We talked about, some of the virtual assistants and how they can get help, while in adherence and so on. But let's look at from doctor standpoint, right? I mean, they have to deal with so many patients, and physician's office. What is the help they can expect to get, or where do we see some use cases from their standpoint, so that they are able to serve their patients better, if you see it from their standpoint?
That's a great comment. So caregivers, so physicians and nurses also, I think they're, at least I know here in the US, and it's not, I think, unique to us, but they're pretty much overwhelmed. The demands on the system are high. And meanwhile, when we're trying to drive down the cost of healthcare, how do you manage that, right? Attrition is an issue, education is an issue. So we look at AI as an augmenting technology, not necessarily a replacing technology. And I think that point of view is shared with some of the large players in the space. I know Google recently made a similar statement at one of their conferences, but generally speaking, in the healthcare, on the point of care side of things, you look at electronic health systems, so the EHR platforms, they have an incredible amount of data describing the patient. And that data coming in is increasing at exponential scale. Originally, it was your lab tests, your radiology tests, what the doctor puts into the system. But now the system can get flooded by data from your wearables, your home CPAP machine, even your bathroom scales now are connected devices, right? So all of this data can flow into, whether it's a patient record management system or your physician facing, but the ability then to mine that data at the point of care to give a much more condensed, rapid profile and recommendation or recommendations to the physicians is very high, right? And that's a huge time saver for doctors. It lets them see more patients per day. It gives patients better access. So I just see that as positive all around. And similarly for nurses, a lot of nurses deal with the repetitive tasks, right? There's a lot of standardized data collection forms. For example, in pre-op, the checklists can take up to 45 minutes, depending on the type of case, of very routine, straightforward questions. And it's understandable that a nurse does it instead of purely a person filling in a form, because sometimes some education needs to happen, clarification of what does this mean, or the patients have unique questions, and that's where the nurse steps in. But now with these large and more sophisticated AI models, they can actually start to replicate some of that that process, right? And you triage only those exceptional cases to the experts who can then spend more time with the patient rather than working on redundant tasks. So I think there's a lot of opportunities at the point of care. By the way, that same data comes back to the pharma companies. So when we're talking about rare disease, we're talking about personalized therapy programs. How do you design and construct those programs? The data that comes from these point of care is invaluable. So this is, again, another example of data management, and where AI can step in and help to manage that data and give insights back to the drug developers for how to deal with rare disease and niche therapy programs.
No, thank you. No, definitely what you're saying is, helping with the data collection and drawing some inferences from it also, right? And making the task of the physician and their offices simplified or simpler, and maybe more accurate decision making also, especially when you're armed with all that data and some inferences done for you ahead of time. One of the questions that I hear from one of the attendees, and I think a lot of people audiences is from India, where everybody's thinking how Gen AI can be helping democratize the healthcare, and definitely we do imagine the possibilities, but it's a very cost-sensitive country. So one of the questions from Noor Fatima says that do you think India, or will it be very expensive to run these Gen AI applications, or for entrepreneurs to develop applications around it? So any thoughts on that?
Great question. My feeling is the costs are going to come down substantially. I think it is going to be very affordable for a number of reasons. With the first foray, this first run we're seeing with what OpenAI has done with ChatGPT, yes, they're very expensive models to build, and consuming them can be pricey. We've seen some reductions here and there with the GPT-3, but GPT-4, which I would say is the current state of the art, is quite expensive. At the same time, what I've seen happening is there's been enough push from the developer community. So there's an expansion of open source models that are getting close and can get close in caliber and performance to what the these expensive ones that we're using today are. I think the cost of computing, you may have seen NVIDIA's announcement recently of their new processors, but as the processing hardware scales up, then the cost of computing goes down. That drives down the cost of the models. I also, very interesting, there's been more and more research in terms of how can we achieve the same level of performance as these trillion parameter model using much fewer parameters, and fewer parameters means fewer compute costs. And there's been some really compelling results from that space. My expectation is that in the fairly near term, we're going to see some significantly powerful models that can solve real world healthcare use cases that can actually run locally, right? They could run on your laptop, and probably not too distant future, even on your smart device. I think we're getting there. So what I would focus on now more is what is the art of the possible with these language models, with the expectations that the cost of utilizing them will dramatically shrink over time.
No, I agree. I hear that Intel has been working on some of the processes that will allow running some of these AI models on your desktop or on your laptops. So that's the direction we are moving in, and not necessarily always be dependent on large data centers and large servers to do this crunching for us. Now, I see a lot of questions here coming, one of them, definitely Rajat, Naman are asking, definitely we talked about the possibilities. Where are some of the red flags also, right? Where do people see, where are the fears? What is coming in the way of the adoption? Where do you see some issues, whether it is ethical or policy or privacy or anything else, right? I mean, what is coming in the way of adoption also for some segments of the...
Yeah, great question. So certainly healthcare, I think a lot of us can kind of predict where the issues are. So data privacy, security is a big one. How is that managed? Can you trust these systems? Can you, these providers of these models to manage your data securely and privately? Especially, we've seen so many data breaches and misuse of personal information. That's tough. Then also the bias issue is quite pertinent. So if you're working with one of the large pre-trained models, let's say we're going to use GPT-3 or GPT-4, and you're using it to answer healthcare questions, right? And maybe you're a patient and you just say, hey, I'm experiencing these kinds of symptoms. Here's a bit about me. What are some possible diagnoses? Obviously, it should not be your doctor, but people do that, right? We use WebMD and all that. How do you know that the system has been trained with the right diversity of patient groups? So most of these big models, one of their training sets is PubMed, which was one of the big centers for medical publications. But it could be, for example, if you're of a particular demographic, that the literature articles that the machine's been trained on don't represent your demographic. And so the predictions could be heavily biased or tilted. And that could happen, but if you're not aware of those biases, if the transparency is not there so that you're aware of those issues, that's a bigger problem. And so the one challenge that the industry is facing is that as these models become more and more powerful and can do more, are the owners of the big pre-trained models, the ones who build them, are willing to be transparent around how these systems were trained? Is there some sort of audit mechanism? That's still an open issue. And so one tactic that is being looked at is maybe the answer isn't this large, massive pre-trained model. Maybe it's a collection of specialized models. So a healthcare model and a financial space model, an aerospace model, and that those individual providers have different set of controls, transparency, auditability, depending on the space that they're in. And an example of this, so Google announced PaLM 2, which is their large language model. They've also announced MedPaLM 2, which is one specifically for physicians. I think it's mostly tilted towards a point of care. And that model would be HIPAA eligible, and you would have those contracts set up with Google in order to have the privacy issues addressed. We don't know how open they'll be in terms of sharing what data it was trained with and looking at those ethnographic type of information, but the expectation is they will be sharing some level of that so that researchers have confidence. So those are the big ones that out there. Certainly data privacy, misuse of data, then the biases are there. Then at the next level, it's over-reliance. So there is some thought that the subject matter expertise, it starts to diminish as we become over-dependent on these systems. And so that's kind of a longer tail problem. But I know there's some thought about how do you set up your solution so that it's a human in the loop, it takes advantage of subject matter expertise and uses the AI to augment it versus having over-reliance on AI, which could be a disaster if something gets mistrained in the model. By the way, I think all of that is an opportunity. So all of these issues, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at this space, coming up with a workflow system, that how do you develop a workflow that has the human in the loop in the system, but doesn't sacrifice the benefits of automation and augmentation? How do you build a system that can maybe critique the output of these models and give a score maybe on bias issues or quality? Those are all opportunities, and I know that a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at innovative ways to solve for that.
Right. So just to wrap up the discussion, there are a lot more questions, but somewhere we are running out of time. I know there are regulations coming. There is since the possibilities are endless here and for the use and the misuse. But for the benefit of entrepreneurs, right? I mean, there's deluge of information. There is so much happening on day-to-day basis. Do you see any reluctance on the part of adoption that, that we should wait and see, and or people are open to trying it in at least at a smaller scale? Or what is the advice to entrepreneurs, jump onto it and or wait and watch for some time? What would you advise to the community who has joined us here?
I think for the entrepreneur, I would say this is a good opportunity to go forward and experiment and actually be slightly aggressive with looking at use cases. The large enterprises are taking a wait and see approach to some degree. They are running pilots and experiments, but they're also waiting for some of the dust to settle among the major models that are out there. But the entrepreneurs should be on top of things. And actually in India, I think one good thing I see from a regulatory perspective, the Indian government is being pretty open about this. I think the fact that they're not pushing any sort of strict regulatory restrictions or controls, like the EU is starting to put in place, then this is an opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs to actually do some of these experiments, pilots, show use cases, and bring that out to the world. I think it represents a good opportunity. So I'm excited about it. I think entrepreneurs should be excited by it. I certainly don't recommend a wait and see attitude, but definitely keep educated, keep on top of the news. Like, it's evolving so fast that it's hard to do that. But you need to see what are the latest models, which things are working, which things are not, and go through that type of typical entrepreneurial iteration cycle to innovate.
No, great. No, thank you so much, Tarun. This is a topic, as I said, that's interesting. Many, both in the user community as well as in the entrepreneurial community. I mean, there is hardly a day or of the week where we don't get a chance to discuss this, in both in the government side or in the side of some of the new applications. There are more questions from Aparna, Devanshu, Rajni. So I think since we have started the discussion, this is not the end of the discussion. We will definitely convene again in a few months and see where we have, how the journey has evolved. And we need to have continuous discussion around it. And I believe this technology is definitely going to be impacting many parts of the ecosystem, right? And I'm so happy to have had you on the show, on this live show of on this discussion, where we believe, so you're sitting right in the Silicon Valley, where most of the action is. We had a pleasure of having Sam Altman in New Delhi just last week, and there's a lot of interest in what he talked about. So we'll remain in touch with you and share some of the updates that you have, with our community here, and vice versa, right? So we want to build that linkage around the world and see the newer developments. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Tarun, for joining late night from California. Good luck to Indegene and all the good work that you're doing there, and we'll remain connected with your Bangalore office and take the discussion forward and share with our community. So thanks a lot. With that, we wrap up this morning's discussion.
Great. Thank you. Real pleasure, Sanjeev. Pleasure to talk to you and the community. And I definitely look forward to continuing the conversation. It's a great and interesting space.